It's just this process of sanitization where they don't want any drama. They don't want anything to go wrong. I think it was like the only policy I've seen them come up with that was smart, but it wasn't even their policy. They might accidentally do something good, but that's about the best you can hope for. He's trying to run this shadow campaign to send a message to people like us to say, hey, I get you. I understand where you're coming from on culture wars, on immigration. Please vote for me. I swear I'll be better in government than I might appear to be now. The policy on women in combat will only last as long as it takes whoever we end up going into combat with posting a FPV drone video of one getting blown up. We've got the entire leadership of Australian politics now wedded to a policy that the heads of the United States Marine Corps, Army, Navy all admit is not ever going to actually happen.
John Macgowan, welcome back to the studio.
Thanks for having me back.
Since you were in here last time, both major parties have launched their campaign for the 2025 election. I reckon the attempt to differentiate one from the other was a pretty token effort. What do you think? Is there much between them these days?
In terms of policy, no, not really. I mean, there are some really big policies that we're just not hearing about. We're not really hearing anything about climate change out of Anthony Albanese, and we're not really hearing anything about nuclear out of Peter Dutton. So some of their most fundamental economic policies, they're running a million miles away from. The suite of policies that they've announced, I mean, particularly with the Liberals' offerings, this is stuff they seem to be doing on the run in response to the emerging campaign conditions. This isn't really a policy election. This is...
The disappointing thing is that Dutton's had 3 years to have this ready. We're now almost just 2 weeks out from the election. And it all seems, like you just said, it all seems to be policy on the fly.
It does seem a little bit like, particularly from Dutton's perspective, that maybe he's gone into this thinking he was doing a lot better than he was, that maybe the margins are a bit more fixed in concrete. And now that he's finding that, well, actually voters are quite mercurial about the differentiation between himself and Albanese, he's actually got to pull a lot of stuff out of the hat. Whereas he probably thought, you know, steady as she goes, if he just didn't rock the boat, if he just simply wasn't Anthony Albanese, that he would win. Now, this is the strategy Albanese took to the 2022 election. You know, he won simply by virtue of not being Scott Morrison, which, I mean, anyone could have done at that point, given the situation Scott Morrison was in. Yeah, anyone could have won.
But what I find confusing about that is that he hasn't really gone on the attack against. If that's his mindset, all I need to do is not be Albo, then why hasn't he gone on the attack on it? There's so much ammunition against
It's really interesting that they just haven't really attacked at all. Albanese is attacking Dutton. He's attacking Dutton daily. There's a lot of, pointed criticism, but there's a lot of kind of noticing out there that he is doing that. Dutton kind of doesn't do that. They haven't done much in the way of like offensive, not like offensive in the offensive sense, but just in like aggressive content, targeting Labor. We haven't seen, the dirt unit seems to be absent this time. I mean, Labor have done a very good job of scalping some of the Liberals candidates and the debt hasn't been repaid. It's almost like they've taken a step back from that this time and said, well, we're just going to be as small a target as possible. You can't really be a small target when you're walking into a campaign trying to differentiate yourself with multi-billion-dollar energy policies, with doing things like Jacinta Price's Doge, the efficiency department, which is drawing...
Why isn't that flying? I mean, you'd think ordinary Australians would be going, we need to reduce the size of government.
I think there's a lot of antipathy about the kind of political culture of the United States out there in the electorate. And we might not share it. I mean, we might be excited about Donald Trump and excited
he's the guest of honour every time.
Excited about a kind of reactionary resurgence and the return of populism. I think for the man in the street, and I mean, a lot of polling bears this out, is that they don't really feel that way. They're nervous, particularly older Australians who are heavily invested either through their superannuation. They might be living off their superannuation, or they're invested in the stock market, or they're worried about house prices. they're not as excited about this as people who are really close to conservative and right-wing politics. And so Dutton's got this, he's got probably the biggest challenge of any right-wing leader in Australian political history, because he's got to run these two campaigns.
Yeah.
He's got to run a campaign for people like us to make sure we don't flip our vote to the Libertarians or to One Nation or Trump or the Patriots or Heart or Sustainable Australia or like this is Gerard Rennick's Freedom Party, who are doing really well.
Yeah.
Like, so he's got to run that campaign, and then he's got to run a campaign for, you know, everyday Australians, and then he's got to run this whole other campaign for the 1.8 million new arrivals who are in his 10 to 21 key seats. So he's running he can't, there's no real central message that can emerge from that. Yeah. Albanese's got a much easier time of it, because he's got to just keep Labor's left flank from revolting and switching to the Greens, which he does very well. Yeah. He's got to stop Labor's blue-collar working class from noticing that he's bringing in 1.8 million migrants. Like, it's a very easy calculus for Albanese. And
one of the conundrums or the paradoxes of this campaign is that he is campaigning on expanding Medicare and making it more widely available and freer than ever, because it's such a proud Labor achievement. But if it needs to be expanded now, that's because it's been neglected for the past 3 years. Two reasons. It's been neglected for 3 years, and it's under enormous pressure from all the people he brought in. Yeah. Look, but he's getting away with it. No one's joining those dots.
I'm surprised. I think it shows a real combination of timidity and maybe an intelligence failure in both the literal and figurative sense out of the Liberals, because like that should be such an easy target for criticism because of the disaster that was the NDIS. I mean, I would be out there on his Medicare policy saying, well, under Labor's NDIS, 25% of Australians are now disabled, and another like 10% of Australians profit from it. So how can we trust that their Medicare policy isn't going to result with 50% of Australians being sick all the time?
Yeah,
I mean, if you
exactly.
Make it, if you
These
make
are easy
it,
messages to sell.
But they're really struggling with good messaging, and it's hard to say why. It's hard to get that out of them, and it's really hard to. I don't think the journalists even who are covering this, that they even have really any interest in getting to that.
No, they don't. Let's talk about what happened yesterday, because
you've
got a little inside information about this. So Albanese was sabotaged somewhere in Sydney, wasn't it?
No, it was in Melbourne.
In Melbourne, yeah.
Yeah. So he's arrived at a hotel, and there's some protesters. I mean, they're being characterised as like alt-right protesters by the ABC. I mean, it's like we've gone back in time to 2015. I don't think alt-right protesters are a thing. But these chaps are, they were previously anti-vaccination content guys. They're now into anti-immigration stuff. And they've shown up and with an iPhone, and they've started questioning Albanese. Now,
this is within the foyer.
They've walked into the foyer of the hotel. Now, it's, triggered this security response. The politicians are saying we're in danger. We can't have strangers coming up to us and asking us questions.
Strangers, they're voters.
And they've presented this as if it's some huge security breach. But I mean, I've spoken to people who are travelling with Albanese who say that he pulled up in his campaign bus with his name on the side of it with 20 journalists. He's done a doorstop shortly before he's gone there. So everyone knew where he was going. It would be very easy for someone to figure out where he was, as well it should be on the campaign trail.
Yeah.
I mean, I've worked on...
But what did the AFP say?
So then the AFP started asking the journalists who told where we were going.
Who leaked the location?
Who leaked the location of the place where he was going to do a public speech?
Who let ordinary voters know where their Prime Minister was going to be on the campaign?
This is, I think, the fourth time it's happened where it's been reported on. And, I mean, every time it's happening, these are just ordinary people. I mean, at worst, someone showed up to the debate holding a hand-drawn sign. Like, that's about as aggressive as they got. I mean, the tone of... I can't remember the young chap's surname, Lawrence from What's News... who shot to prominence when he did it first at the Albanese conference. The question he asked was asked more politely than I've seen Andrew Clennell ask questions in those press conferences.
Exactly. He was actually quite. He was
Yeah.
clearly nervous, so he
Yeah,
wasn't being
yeah.
aggressive. But he just representing hundreds of thousands of Australians wanting that question
And
answered.
as you and I was discussing before, I mean, you're now getting this crackdown. So they deployed James Patterson, Senator James Patterson, to go on Insiders the week after the What's News incident. And he said, we need to increase security. Politicians are at risk from questions. And they might think that's a good idea. They might not want, unplanned things happening on the campaign trail. But it's also going to mean the public's not getting a look at when people like them. Right. So you've
Good
got,
point.
so you've
Yes.
got, maybe you don't want a guy crashing your press conference and asking a question that you don't want to answer, but you do want to be walking down Main Street without being flanked by security, shaking hands with ordinary punters who tell you you're doing a good job.
I think you could probably blame the media for that, because in an uncontrolled situation, if a politician is surrounded by people who just admire him and want to shake his hand, that's not news. But if someone abuses him, it's front page.
But I mean, I've seen throughout my career, I saw politicians handle this really well. I mean, John Howard who was a significantly bigger deal than Anthony Albanese and Peter Dutton were. I mean, John Howard at the time was part of a coalition invading Iraq. He had banned Australians from owning guns at one point. Like, if there was a risk to anyone ever, it would have been John Howard. And John Howard refused to be flanked by security. He had security guards, but you'd never notice them. Yeah. And he loved walking around in election campaigns. People would yell at him and yell abuse at him. And I've seen John Howard do this in the flesh. And he would look at them and he would give them a thumbs up and keep walking. Right?
But he'd also get those really wonderful, spontaneous meetings with people who just adored him.
Those are the things you want in campaigns.
That's the sort of thing you want in a democracy. You want people going up to their leader and saying, I think you're doing a good job.
Yeah.
Keep it up. Like, we're all in the same country here.
Campaigns are this balancing act between, we're about creating organised chaos. That's how campaigns look good. I mean, advanced teams' jobs, when I worked for them, were not to tidy up, tidy up. Like Dutton had a case where he went to a children's mental health clinic and his advanced teams arrived beforehand and took down all the rainbow flags and took down all the signs that said about diversity and things like that. And he was announcing money for a children's mental health service, probably run by people of that ideology, but he didn't want the rainbow flag in the background. Now, what good advanced teams would do is have gone there first, seen all that, gone back to Dutton and said, well, look, you're going to be surrounded by all these rainbow flags. The optics aren't great, but this is actually a good opportunity to soften your image with the gay community. Like, you can do something like that.
Absolutely. Or even address the issue of gay sexual politics in a mental institute.
You could have all these options. Instead, it's just this process of sanitization where they don't want any drama. They don't want anything to go wrong. They want the correct number of flags, with each flag the correct distance apart. They want the key messages up there, and that's it. They don't want anything
Speaking
organic.
of flags and messages, what did you read into the 3 flags behind Albanese on Sunday?
Well, they keep changing, right? Yeah, they keep.
But the central one was the Aboriginal flag, not the Australian flag.
He keeps moving them around.
Yeah,
I noticed he's never doing the same ones twice.
Yeah,
I think it's so he can't be accused of preferencing one over the other. Stuff like this. I mean, this is when you don't have solid messages, when you don't have a whole point of the campaign, this is the kind of stuff people get sidetracked on. I mean, like, we're doing this interview just down the road from Wentworth, where the central issue of that campaign, one of the most important races in the country, it's on a knife's edge. Everyone I talk to says there's like 400 votes between the Liberals and Allegra Spender.
Right.
And Roe Knox. And the central argument of that campaign on Facebook and in all their media, earned media that they've done, is who's stealing whose cornflakes. In one of the most important races with one of the most highly educated and wealthiest electorates in the country, and you're arguing about who keeps nicking your core flutes and drawing clown faces on them.
You know what else? Talk about, one of the most highly educated and wealthy electorates in the nation. But where are the sort of federal public services in that electorate? I mean, you've got St Vincent's Hospital. It's a dump.
Oh, yeah.
Half of it's
there's
closed
nothing.
down.
Try go. I don't think there's a Medicare there. There wasn't when I was there.
Yeah.
There's certainly no Centrelink office.
Yeah, so they're not talking about what Canberra can do for Wentworth.
Yeah,
they're
God,
talking about corflues.
They're talking about
I mean,
corflues,
let's
yeah.
expand that into the election at large.
Yeah.
Is this the worst election campaign overall you've ever seen?
Well, it's definitely the worst one I've seen. I don't know if it's the worst one ever. I mean, I joked on Twitter the other day that someone had to check on John Hewson because he's no longer going to have the crown for the worst ever Liberal campaign. I was alive for John Hewson's campaign, but I think I was about 6.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny because so many of the criticisms of it, like Fight Back was the last campaign where they wrote a book. And this used to be a really common thing in election campaigns. Political tragics like me have collections of these from like the mid-90s backwards. They would write like a novel. Like it's like a whole book with the name of the campaign on it and with all the policies and with the like deep thoughts of the leaders. And they'd have chapters covering all the different candidates. Like,
yeah, and half of it's written by economists.
Yeah. And Fight Back had one of those. I still got my Fight Back book. I suspect it'll be worth something one day. And when you look at that, and like I joke that it's the worst election, and we say it's the worst election because Houston had this enormous gaffe. But like the irony is those gaffes are now a daily occurrence in our campaigns, right? It's just, you know, news cycles moved a lot slower then, and one bad 7:30 report could scuttle your entire campaign.
Yeah.
I mean, nowadays, every 7:30 report is bad for them, and they just have to recover the next day and keep rolling with a constantly diminishing primary vote. The other thing was he was taking an incredibly complex and country-changing policy to that election, you know, and he fumbled it. Now, that's not... You know, you kind of got to give him props for at least trying the generational policy change. They're not doing that this time.
That was the other thing about the campaign launches on Sunday, and there should have been, as you said last time you were here, the Canberra has been ignoring the big structural reforms for decades. Yeah, there not even a hint of a long-term vision in either of those campaign launches.
I mean, look, I don't think there was nothing in those campaign launches, really. I mean, they pivoted to housing for the entire day without talking about immigration. They managed to get through these big housing policies, which are extremely expensive, without once mentioning supply. It was just...
But, I mean, for example, Anthony Albanese just throws out, I'm going to spend $10 billion on 100,000 homes for first home buyers. And that was...
Did you do the math on that, though?
Yeah, it's $100,000 a house.
$100,000 a house.
How can you build a house for $100K? You know
well, I mean, I guess here's the thing. If you think about it, actually the bricks and mortar of the house, I mean, it can be between $40,000 and about $150,000. So it is possible, depending on where you do it. Where are you going to get the land from? So
exactly,
where are you going to get $100,000 worth of land? Like, none of it makes any sense.
Well, the way I looked at it, the way I thought he'd calculated it was that he was going to build these houses and then sell them to first home buyers.
Exactly, right.
So it would, you know, it would cost $10 billion over a period, but the government would probably, if you look at the numbers correctly, the government would probably be profiting out of the sale of those houses. So why is he in government and not in the construction business?
Why does he want to become a property developer? I mean, that policy's crazy. Dutton's policy on, you know, his 5% deposits and stuff, that's no better. I mean, actually, if you measure the two campaign launches side by side, I say probably Albanese is a nose ahead because his tax reform policy, I think he made a critical error by characterising it as a tax cut and not a tax reform. I mean, that is probably the only policy either side has announced where you can find more than one economist who supports it. And every economist I know has been saying, I mean, Stephen Hamilton, who's a really good economist, put a paper out about this about 2 years ago where he actually called for a $3,000 box tick on tax returns so that everyone didn't have to collect receipts. Everyone just gets $3,000 worth of expenses. He modelled the benefit to the budget of that at 3,000. So I don't know what it would be under Labor's plan, but the benefit to the budget of that of $5 billion, because the price of auditing and the price of going through everyone's shoeboxes full of receipts it costs so much. to
So
recoup so
how long
little.
ago did Hamilton come up?
I think he put that paper out about 2 years ago.
Because if I'm not mistaken, Peter Costello made a similar proposal when he
Yeah,
was
yeah.
treasurer.
Well, I mean,
I think the figure then was 1,500.
Costello, my recollection from 2004 was that they really actually did put that in place, because it's generally known in the tax community that claims under 1,500, I mean, your chance of getting audited for those, unless you do it over and over again, it's very low.
Yeah.
So I think there were regulatory shifts in the background. But I mean, the point that other economists made is, look, not everyone knows that. Not everyone goes to see a tax agent. So you're actually, it costs people money to go to tax agents.
Yeah.
It's interesting that the only press release criticising that policy, well, there are two press releases criticising the policy. One's disingenuous from the Libs because they say it's a tax cut we can't afford. Well, it's not even it's not a tax cut at all, and we make money from it. But then, of course, the accountants, the accounting lobby groups, all came out and said we don't want to do it. Like that's a really good policy.
Is $1,000 stingy though?
I think in the current environment it is. I mean, you know, it was only that long ago. Remember, they loosened up the COVID claims. Remember when everyone had to buy stuff to work from home, and they released the threshold on those.
Yep.
I mean, that didn't cost this country that much money, and there was a backswing improvement on growth because you had people buying stuff at a time when they were locked in their houses. I mean, either thinking they were going to die or thinking the whole thing was made up. So, you know, there were so many benefits to that policy. Look, I think it's probably the best one Labor's come up with. I'm still not going to vote for them because of it. I'm not going to vote for them just for, and it's not even an extra $1,000. It's the same $1,000 I was going to claim anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, look, I think it was like the only policy I've seen them come up with that was smart. But it wasn't even their policy. And it just goes to show what's happening.
Yeah.
Is they're getting to this point in the campaign where they've got nothing there. They've done no work themselves. So one of the kind of unintended good consequences of the campaign is we could end up with some good policy from just them cherry picking from various, you know, unsolicited proposals by economists and lobby groups over the last few years. They might accidentally do something good.
Yeah.
But that's about the best you can hope for.
Kind of comes back to the uni party though, doesn't it?
Well,
I mean,
exactly.
there's not much difference. So let's have a look at, let's see what your predictions are. The two parties on the two-party preferred are sitting at Labor at 53 and the Coalition at 47.
News
is that right?
poll has them 5-2, 5-7-5. YouGov, I think, has gone up to 5-3. I mean, it changed day to day. I mean, my view is that the primaries are largely accurate. I mean, you see people criticising the polls all the time on Twitter. I mean, I think that's indicative of very low mathematical literacy in our country nowadays. Yeah. The polls are better than they've ever been. I mean, when I started working in politics 20 years ago, margins of errors on polls were as much as 4%. Nowadays, margin of errors are below 1%. Confidence intervals are at 95%. When you look at those primaries, I think we can say with a lot of confidence that's where it stands if an election was held tomorrow. The question...
Can you just repeat the primary figures?
I'm not 100% sure what the primaries are right now. The combined primary is sitting on 66, but I think Labor is on about 3-6 and the Liberals are on, I think, 3-3 or somewhere around that.
Yeah.
It's low, though.
Yeah. So Labor won on 33% last time.
Yeah.
So they've increased their primary.
I think they have increased their primary.
That's just, I mean, we could talk about that all day because...
Well, actually, sorry, no. The combined primaries have gone down because they're losing votes to the minor parties.
Right.
So there is that issue as well.
That's where I was leading, actually. We'll talk about the minor parties in a minute, but where do you see the primary vote? Is it solid and it won't move?
Oh, it's going to move. It's just going to keep moving. And this is the tactical error they've made right at the beginning, is I think Dutton's gone into the campaign thinking, well, I just need to not make any mistakes and the vote will stay the same. But, you know, people are mercurial, people are volatile. And, you know, there's the situation in the United States, there's the trade situation, you know, we've got Chinese ships circumnavigating the country.
Yeah, now we've got Russia.
Now we've got Russian long range. I don't think the Russians are ever going to put those things there, but like it just goes to show the kind of volatile nature of the world we live in, and of course it's going to affect people's votes. On there, I think it was in 2019. Peter Van Onselen used the term "goat track to victory." I think what we see now is there is a goat track to victory for Dutton, but it relies on securing a higher percentage of preferences from the minor parties than he got last time. And that's why I'm a bit iffy on the high two-party preferreds, because the polling companies are predicating that on the preference flows from the last election, which I think were probably a high watermark, particularly for UAP, who had only, I think, sent, from memory, about 19% of their...
Before you go into going among the weeds there, I just want to clarify. So the two-party preferred at the moment is sitting at about 53 for Labor.
So 53, 47.
And 47 for the coalition. Okay, so whether the coalition can close that gap depends on how the preferences flow from the minor parties.
Yeah.
Now, one of the key minor parties is what used to be the UAP and is now the Trumpets.
Yeah, the Trumpets
They should have called it the Harmonicas for Freedom or something.
Yeah.
But
you know what's funny is I've been really critical of them, but they're actually not doing too badly.
Is that right?
I'm a little bit impressed with them. I hate to admit it, because I criticise Palmer all the time for just being, it's a grift. Like, I'm convinced it's just a really complicated money laundering operation, but
maybe he's selling tobacco, sort of smuggled tobacco on the side.
Babbitt is probably the most entertaining politician in Canberra, who just consistently gets his mug out there making people laugh and kind of making you think about how bad these guys are. But also they've got a couple of really good policies. Their policy on the resources, it's not a rent tax, but effectively an export levy, so that Australia can start having the same kind of opportunities out of our resources export market as, say, Norway does. I mean, that's a fantastic policy.
Well, that wouldn't be a bad thing.
I mean, you can't tell me that anyone's going to stop exporting, coke and coal and iron ore to China because of a modest tax that, at the right scale could provide every Australian with a universal basic income. I mean, that's what the Norwegians do with theirs.
Indeed.
We sell a lot more stuff out of the ground than Norway does. Yeah. So I think that's a really great policy. And
but let's just get back to the fringe parties, the minor parties, and how they will flow. So are you saying most of the calculations at the moment are based on 2022 figures, which were at sort of a lower amount flowing to the coalition?
That's right. Then
so if you calculate off the 2019 figures,
it goes up a lot. It goes up a lot.
And the reason the 22 figures are distorted is because there was so much ill feeling towards Scott Morrison.
Yeah, and also because in both of those elections, minor party vote was also a lot lower. The electorate was waiting with brickbats for Scott Morrison, and so you weren't inclined to do a protest vote. The protest vote was Albanese, right?
Yeah.
In 2019, where everyone thought the race was so tight, and a lot of people on the right supported Scott Morrison. There was no real right-wing protest vote. I mean, that's what we're seeing this time. We're seeing a protest vote by the right that is protesting Peter Dutton's bad performance and the performance of the Liberals.
It's actually, that's kind of weird, because normally protest votes are against the incumbent.
Yeah.
I mean, Dutton hasn't even got there
exactly
yet.
And this is because he's so, limp-wristed. It's the term he used. But he is so limp-wristed on his support for the Liberal Party's right-wing base. It's actually...
Well, he got rid of Ben Britton.
Which was crazy. Look, and that was a failure on so many levels. A political failure because, he's trying to run this shadow campaign to send a message to people like us to say, hey, I get you. I understand where you're coming from on culture wars, on immigration. Please vote for me. I swear I'll be better in government than I might appear to be now. And then it's also just a general administrative failure, because how did they not know that? I mean, I knew that. I watched him on Joel Jamal. Everyone knew that. Yeah. So you're telling me that there wasn't a single person inside New South Wales Liberal HQ who watches Joel Jamal? I mean, one of the...
Just to clarify for the viewers, so Joel Jamal is a very successful podcaster here in Sydney, and he had Ben Britton on, and Ben Britton's former ADF, and Ben Britton said, I don't think we should send women into combat.
Yep.
Which hardly controversial.
I tell you, I think it's going to be one of those sleeper issues too, because it is a joke of a policy, women in combat. You talk to anyone in defence and they tell you the background of why that's there. No one is going to put women in combat ever. That's never going to happen. The policy on women in combat will only last as long as it takes whoever we end up going into combat with posting a FPV drone video of one getting blown up. The Australian public, the American public, the British public will not abide a woman dying in combat. I mean, America's entire program of sending women to Iraq in the rear echelons nearly fell apart when that poor girl got captured and was held hostage. American Special Forces died rescuing her, right? I mean, they stopped talking about it for a long time after that. You know, it's not a real policy. And no one, you look at in the United States, even their biggest like leftist ideologues don't spend a lot of time defending women in combat because they know how deeply unpopular it is. And no one wants to have been the one with all the recordings of them supporting it when the policy fails. But we've got now Richard Marles, Peter Dutton, Anthony Albanese. We've got the entire leadership of Australian politics now wedded to a policy that the heads of the United States Marine Corps, Army, Navy, except for the Air Force, all admit is not ever going to actually happen.
How did we get here?
How did we get there? I mean, stupidity, incompetence. You know, do they? I mean,
there's no. I think there's no conviction or principle in politics anymore.
I had a really good theory from a good friend of mine who's worked in politics longer than I have, and he said, because I presented that exact argument, I said, is it incompetence? Is it stupidity? Like, are they deliberately throwing it? And he made a really good point to me. He said, you know what I think it is they just don't care. And I mean, I think I put something on Twitter yesterday. The Liberals had posted a graphic on Twitter, and it was like Anthony Albanese as a Muppet. And there wasn't even a really unattractive Muppet. Like, he kind of made Albanese look nice, like a children's cartoon character. Like, it was just this ham-fisted, cringeworthy piece of collateral. And I mean, people in my replies were questioning how something like that gets made. I suggested that maybe it was entirely AI generated and no human was responsible. But then a mate of mine reminded me, he said, well, actually, all that stuff's being produced by a New Zealand-based social media firm, right? They subcontract it all out. And if you think about it, like there was a story in the, I can't remember if it was the Australian or the AFR the other day where it was a hit job piece from inside Liberal HQ criticising Dutton's team. And they were saying that HQ and Dutton aren't on the same page. There's one feature of political campaigns that makes them work, and their campaigns are kind of built around a cult of personality around the leader. And you attract people to the leader who are devoted to them and will work 20-hour days and will do anything for them. I have lunch every couple of weeks with a guy who's an ex-John Howard staffer, junior John Howard staffer, who was only there for like a year or so. He still refers to him as Mr. Howard, like when you're sitting around a lazy Susan with him, right? The cult of John Howard is so deep that like guys still go to his functions now. Like they've never let it go.
Oh, I've seen him. I've seen him in a room.
Another really great example of a political cult is Dan Andrews, right? You look at the stuff Dan Andrews produced. You look at the people he had around him, this group of guys who are just 100% devoted and loyal to Dan Andrews and would do anything for him. I've even been in some of these cults myself. I mean, we had one around Tony Abbott in 2013, right?
We did, yeah.
There is no cult of Anthony Albanese. There is no cult of Peter Dutton. Peter probably has, by my count, maybe 6 guys around him in his office, probably on the travelling team, who are just 100% Dutton guys who are fully invested in Dutton. But the Liberal HQ is staffed with predominantly moderates from the other side of politics who don't really care that much about Dutton, probably didn't want him as leader. I mean, are they going to work a 20-hour day? Are they going to produce the best possible content? Or are they going to outsource it to a bunch of new Kiwis designing Muppets on Twitter, right? Like, that's what makes a campaign great, is the absolute commitment of the people who are working there. Labor actually has kind of the same problem because Anthony Albanese is a man of the left. The people in his office, I've no doubt, are 100% Albanese guys. But if we went down to Sussex Street right now and listened in, they're not 100% Albanese guys. That outfit's run by the unions and Centre Unity, who are right-wing Labor, who know Albanese was a compromise candidate. Are they working 20-hour days? Are they doing their absolute best to get Albanese elected? Probably not.
There was a good video going around this week of, I'm not sure how old it was, but it seemed very pertinent. it was Albanese with Chris Minns at a press conference.
Oh,
And
yeah.
Minns was just about to take another question, and Albo just shoved him right out of the way. I saw that as factional. Is that a factional thing?
They don't like each other. They've never liked each other, right?
Yeah.
But Minns is a guy. There's a cult of Chris Minns in New South Wales. A good example of when you develop a good political cult is how many people are working for them that are from outside the party mainstream, right? Because on some level, there's hardline party guys who will always back you. But the most successful Australian politicians surround themselves with people who are their people, right? Mike Baird was a great example of that.
Yeah.
I mean, I couldn't name a Liberal member inside Mike Baird's office, right? All his people were loyal, first and foremost, to Mike Baird. They would die in a ditch for Mike Baird, right? You don't see that with these guys to the same extent. They're not attracting people and good talent from outside. And I wonder if that's not a factor behind why the material isn't so bad. Money certainly isn't a problem, right?
For either side.
They've got $90 million. They tried to cap it at $90 million. I think they failed recently. So we know that they have enough money. It's not like they're crying poor. Donations are still coming.